Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the little boy that lives in my mouth. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going, Matt?
It's going well. I think I made the same joke last time. How about this? Here's Maddie.
You know, it occurs to me that the whole little boy that lives in my mouth thing sounded okay when I wrote it in the script. Less good when I said it out loud.
I didn't notice, but now that you've drawn attention to it, okay.
Yeah. So maybe if we were professional, we would just do another take and do something different, but we're not. So we're just going to carry on with the show.
Yeah. Everything about that was a poor adaptation of our normal intro process.
Wow. Look at you just rein it back to brilliance, to podcasting brilliance. That's incredible.
Now, does that imply that we have any specific feelings about this film? You got to keep listening to find out, no matter how much you want to switch off based on how this is going so far.
Matt, you are the fucking Stanley Kubrick of podcasting right now. You're killing it.
Thank you.
You're giving him hooks and ladders.
and
That's it. That's all I got.
Foreshadowing.
There you go. All right, folks. This week on the show, after finishing King's novel, we decided that we wanted to do an episode where we revisit Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the Kubrick movie. Both of us watched it again last week, and we just thought we'd talk about it as an adaptation. And I think I want to say this up front here, Matt. We have both talked about The Shining multiple times via the audio podcasting format. And so I don't think this is going to be an episode specifically about us talking about The Shining as a movie. I think what we really wanted to do here was more talk about it specifically as an adaptation of the book, because this is the one conversation that you and I have never been able to have about this movie until this point, is how it fares as an adaptation and what we like and don't like about it in that particular lens.
Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, we talked about it over on the Other Levels of the Tower bonus Patreon feed once, and then probably somewhere else. I don't even remember, but yeah,
it had to have been multiple times. Yeah. So yeah, that's really the vein of this conversation is really just going to be how it works as an adaptation. If you want to hear our overall specific detailed thoughts on The Shining itself as a movie, you can go listen to that episode if you're a patron. Maybe one day we'll release that as like a bonus episode on the main feed for you folks, but as of right now, it's not available there.
All right.
And then I think, Matt, we're going to wrap up the episode by talking about the best adaptation of The Shining, which is, of course, the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror spectacular titled The Shinning. We both watched this again also, and we're going to talk about that at the end of the episode.
It's definitely the funniest adaptation of The Shining.
That's a fair statement for sure.
I feel like that's safe to say.
All right, Matt, let's get into it. Let's talk all about The Shining. Matt, what is this movie all about?
A family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter, where a sinister presence influences the father into violence, while his psychic son sees horrific forebodings from both past and future.
Now, did he see any horrific forebodings from the past?
I mean, I think what they mean is like the ghosts, I guess.
I guess. Okay, that's fair.
But okay, whatever.
The Shining was written by Stanley Kubrick and Diane Johnson. It was directed, of course, by Kubrick, and it stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and Danny Lloyd, as well as Scatman Crothers. Matt, as we said, this is not an episode talking about The Shining specifically as a movie, but let's just get it out of the way. Do you like this movie? Do you enjoy this movie?
Yes, this rewatch reaffirmed for me that I do like this movie. I think I'm just going to put away all sense of like whether people are going to think I'm an idiot or not, and just say on this rewatch I was like, the beginning of this movie is incredibly boring and slow. And I was and I was trying to be like, okay, like, but maybe there's like some subtle clever Kubrickian thing that's going on that I just need to be paying attention. But I was thinking about it and I was like, I can see why this movie like initially was poorly received because of the beginning. It's so incredibly slow. It's slower than I even remembered. It's very, very slow. And then at a certain point, there's like a I don't know if there's even a specific moment, but there's a slow building of dread. And for me, the point where it suddenly became incredibly engaging was like the first time that Jack really snaps at Wendy. And it's like suddenly there's conflict, right? There was like no conflict. There was this background level of foreboding in the film, but like everything was basically fine, and then suddenly conflict. I guess I could say also up front, like as I was watching, I was sort of watching, trying to be like, what would this have been like to watch it in whenever in 1980, not knowing the story at all, knowing nothing about it. Like what would that have been like? And then in parallel, I was sort of simultaneously watching it, obviously as an adaptation to compare against the book, right? So all that being said, man, the beginning is slow, and that's like a huge contrast to the book, because the book is delving into the psychology of Jack and Wendy and Danny and like their histories and their past and all this complicated stuff, and it's riveting from the beginning, or at least it was for me. So that was I guess, I don't know, that felt like a good entry point to me, because my overall like takeaway from this viewing in particular was my strong reaction to the way the movie begins.
Yeah.
Overall,
that's so fascinating. I mean, I just to get it out of the way on my end, I think this is an absolute masterpiece of a movie. I love it to death as a film. I completely disagree with you 100% that the beginning is slow. I mean, it's slow in the fact that it's a 70s movie in which they all kind of move very, very slowly. There's a very slow, deliberate pace to it. But from the second the movie opens and that ominous score is laid over the top of these beautiful vistas as the car drives up the mountainside, I'm there for it. I love it to death. Now, with the topic at hand is how this movie works as an adaptation, and frankly, this is the first time I've watched this movie immediately following a revisit of the book. And of course, I've never visited the book as closely as I did for this podcast. So it's all in all a completely new experience for me. And I have to say, as an adaptation, it is kind of wild how much it fails to do anything that the book does. Like I'm really torn here, because Kubrick is one of my favorite directors. I think he's brilliant. I think the tone that this movie establishes from the beginning is just so delicious, and there are moments in it that really make me think, oh, he read this part in the book and something specifically spoke to him about these characters in this part, and he managed to capture that particular thing perfectly here. But everything else is just like, oh, where's the Wendy I know? Where's the Jack I know? Where is the, I mean, the conflict between characters is there, but where's the interior conflict? Where is any of this stuff? And it's so weird, because it's not a traditional story of a movie. Like Kubrick kind of takes what is, I mean, I think King operates in a lot of like the traditional movements of plot, and there's none of that here, really. And that's that. Like we have a friend of ours, Michael, who hates this movie, and he hates this movie because there's no characters really. No one really changes by the end of it. The conflict is pretty obvious, and it's just really a tone poem of a movie, kind of. And he just doesn't care for it at all. And it is really interesting that like almost none of what makes the book great, in my opinion, was captured in this thing.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. It's great for reasons that are totally different than the reasons that the book is great.
Yeah,
which is what's always been fascinating about it, because it's like, how'd you do that, Kubrick?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just like I feel like some of the reasons why our friend Michael hates it like could be fixed by a sort of more modern edit. And I'm not saying like you could fix the movie and make it better. I'm saying that you could make it more like something that Michael or just maybe broadly speaking, like somebody more used to modern film pacing would enjoy. because I know that so I'm thinking about like the parts of the movie that are my favorite are basically, okay, I'll just say anything past the first time that he snaps at her, there's this real sense of tension and anxiety,
Yeah.
which reminds me of like we just talked about Tarantino the other day, and how like Tarantino can craft these scenes that are just vibrating with tension. But Tarantino has a much more modern sensibility for how to pace things, and so like if you just paced it faster, then The Shining would feel way more like urgent and frantic than it does. And I think honestly Kubrick didn't want it to feel urgent. I think
Yeah.
he wanted this grinding dread and discomfort. That's
Absolutely.
that's absolutely the thing, is that like it's a movie with basically no jump scares, nothing of what you would typically think or expect to find in a horror movie. It's just like designed, it's psychological warfare designed to make you feel anxious and uncomfortable and mesmerized.
And to be clear here, when you're talking about the moment he first snaps at her, is that the moment where she comes and brings him like a drink while
Yeah.
he's writing? That moment?
Yeah, that's the moment that I'm thinking of, where really honestly prior to that, and I think it's just an objective statement to say that there's really no overt conflict in the movie, at least not between the characters, right? It's if there's
Yeah.
any conflict, it's all this sort of nascent, like something's wrong, but I don't know what.
There is no conflict, but it is kind of remarkable how much just an incredible piece of shit Jack Torrance is
Mhm.
from like the get go. And we talked about this a lot in the book too, right? Like I think our introduction to Jack Torrance in the book is, oh God, this guy's a fucking asshole. And then I think what King does really brilliantly actually is kind of slowly backfill that initial opinion with moments that get you to actually like and care about this guy. And that is the thing that is completely missing from this movie, is that, oh, he's a fucking asshole, and then you just ride that throughout the entire movie. Like there is literally never a moment in this movie where I can be like, oh, I kind of like this guy, and oh, look, he's a good dad. Like he never is. He's never a good dad. Like
Yeah.
even the car ride up to the hotel where Danny's asking him questions, like there's never a moment of him like like he seems annoyed, like just generally annoyed by the questions, generally annoyed by anyone talking to him about anything ever. Like there's that one moment that I think like with a different director it might play straight, of him having genuine concern and care for his son, when his son comes to him and says like he invites him to come sit down on the bed with him and then asks if he'd hurt him. But the way the scene plays, because of the tone of the scene, it just comes off as terrifying.
Mhm.
And like the one anchor of the book is this idea that there is this really close relationship, that one of the tragedy of the book is that his son deeply loves his father, and that's the tragedy of it, is they both deeply love each other, and he destroys himself and thus destroys that relationship. And there's not, I mean, maybe I'm missing it. Did you ever get a moment of like Danny likes his dad and his dad likes him? Because Danny just seems generally like terrified of this man the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Danny is the performance is really interesting, right? Because it's a very very reserved sort of almost blank performance, and I'm not. This isn't like a criticism of the actor. Like it's the performance of a child who is basically so terrified that they're just sort of like hiding emotionally. And that's the way Danny always is. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
he has this like closed expression,
Yeah.
no matter what's going on, really, even when he's like playing. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes, it's interesting because like on the one hand, it makes it impossible to really fully connect with him as a character the way that you connect to Danny in the book, who's just this sweet little boy.
Yeah.
But I think once again, I think that that's what Kubrick is going for.
Yeah.
Um, Although I did pay more attention to Danny this time, I'll say that much. Like that was one thing, is Danny in this movie, watching it previously, has always been such a minor, such a background presence, that I didn't pay much attention to him. But then having the character of Danny from the book in my head, I paid a lot more attention to Danny this time. And obviously noticing how many of the scenes from the book actually are, he goes into room 237, of course, in this book. In this movie, he gets the bruises on his neck from the woman. It actually follows the plot beats better than I remembered. I was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, this is all in there. Actually, it's funny how different they made it while honoring so much of the plot.
No, that's true. Is the plot beats of this, like the major plot beats are all here, all of them. I mean, there's some changes. There's no hedge animals. I guess you could say like the in Overlook plot beats are there. The exterior to Overlook stuff is all kind of removed. There is no, from our understanding, there is no drunken night with his friend that they run over a kid's bike and freak out. The way this movie simplifies it is just he hurt his son and that's what caused him to go sober, which not entirely true, right? Because as you pointed out, there's some timing inconsistencies here, because when he's complaining about what he did to his son, he says that was 3 goddamn years ago. And then later he says he's talking about how he's been sober for 5 months. And Wendy specifically says he went sober after he hurt their son. That was what caused him to go sober. So there's a lot to be filled in here that's missing. And I mean, Kubrick is such a attention to detail guy that, like, I don't know. I think it's fun to read into that and say that one of them is lying for sure about something.
Yeah, right. And you can really, it's interesting how having the Jack of the book in my head, I don't want to commit the sin rather of like projecting stuff that I want to be there, but you can kind of see something more of that Jack in the film Jack if you look. And what I mean specifically is the narrativizing and the self deceit.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically, the I think we remarked on this while we were covering the book, but basically the whole scene where he's the first time that he's in the bar talking to Lloyd, like huge chunks of that are just taken verbatim from the book. And you really see that like that is that part of Jack's personality, book Jack, his whining and self-indulgence, his like need to sort of tell a story where he's the victim. I think that's all in there. There were other bits, and this is more nonverbal, but I love there's the whole sequencing of, Danny walks in while Wendy is okay. So like it's a great scene. Okay, so Jack is woken up from a nightmare. He's freaking out because he says that he dreamed that he chopped up his family. Wendy's helping him, and then Danny comes in and she's shouting at him to go to his room, and he's traumatized from being attacked by the ghost. And she goes over to Danny and he's bruised, and then there's like the perfect, like it's perfectly conveyed from the book actually, where like the way the camera conveys her slowly turning to look at Jack, and then the camera showing Jack as Jack realizes like, she thinks I did it, and then and then her going, you did this, and then his like stunned denial, but then there's like a flicker of like, I don't think so. And then after that, he's so this is where it kind of breaks from the book, but in a way that's like cinematic, is that he's walking back to the Colorado Lounge, and he's like he's arguing with somebody who's not there, right? And he's like pumping his arms and like punching the air, and that and like to me that was like, oh, that's perfect, because like that's our Jack having his little fit that he has, his little childish little meltdown that he has every time somebody accuses him of something, except we're not hearing his internal monologue, we're just seeing him behave this way.
No, I think you're onto something here. I think the movie manages to really perfectly capture all the negative intricacies of Jack Torrance. It
Mhm.
really does a fabulous job at that, because you're so right. I mean, it's again a testament to Nicholson's performance as well. He's so good at this, that like that you know, that shadow boxing scene is so good. You're so right. His reaction is so good, and let's once again give huge credit to Shelley Duvall, who I think is unfairly maligned a lot in this movie for her performance, which I think is just a masterpiece
Yeah.
of like even her, like I'm getting a little off topic here, but that scene you're talking about, when like he wakes up screaming, she goes to comfort him, and he's like, "Oh, I had this horrible dream where I murdered you and chopped you up into pieces," and you can tell she's like, uh like she wants to comfort him. She does want to comfort him, but also it's making her deeply uncomfortable. To like this whole exchange is like, I don't know. I've been married a few years now. I don't typically have dreams about horribly mutilating my wife.
Uh-huh.
It's just like this deeply uncomfortable scene, and she does a great job at it. But no, to get back on track here, you're so right that I think Kubrick finds the way to capture the the shittiness of Jack Torrance right out of the book. It is exactly there. His interactions with Lloyd, I think, are perfect for that. Now it is the worst possible version of him, right? Like I think the change to the room 217 scene is really indicative of this. You know, in the book, he just goes in there, sees the woman behind the curtain, freaks the fuck out, and gets out of there. And Kubrick turns this into a makeout scene where like he walks into a room, sees an inexplicable naked woman, and just immediately goes, "Yeah, let's
Mhm.
fucking go, man."
Mhm.
Let's get it. Let's get it. And
Mhm.
I think that's such a fascinating choice, because like, again, there is no moment that this movie allows you to feel even a bit of sympathy for Jack Torrance.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's true. It's so interesting, right? Because like Jack does actually suck.
Yeah, no, he
it,
totally does.
but the book does want you to. It's so interesting, and it's so hard to like pin down and talk about clearly. But like, I think the book just wants you to see Jack as a well-rounded human. And the thing is, it's very, very hard to just see a character as a well-rounded human without also kind of empathizing with them and feeling
Mhm.
bad for them.
Yeah.
And like I think if you were to say to Stephen King, like, Jack in your book was a huge piece of shit, King would be like, yes. Um, but maybe he would say, but he was a human
Yeah.
piece of shit, and maybe that's kind of where he breaks with this movie is that this version of Jack is almost one dimensionally a
Yeah.
piece of shit.
He's a monster from the jump. And
Mhm.
I mean that's an interesting question to ask ourselves here, right? Like, why? Like, obviously Kubrick and his co-author read this book, and they have a very clear image of what they want to do with this movie in their mind, and that image is, we're going to cut out all the moments of sympathy towards this person. This is that we're just going to make this guy a monster. We're going to portray him as a monster from the very beginning. We're going to cast Jack Nicholson as this person who has like the best evil villain eyebrows of all time, and so we can just have, even when he's not running around trying to murder his family, he's just going to arch his eyebrows in a way that makes you go, "Oh my god, this guy's insane." And we're just going to really lean into that. And why, right? Like, what is it? I mean, is it literally that they just read this book, and the sympathy and the empathy we had towards this character, despite the fact that him a monster, is just, they didn't feel that at all, and felt no need to capture that? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I think my previous theory, which I don't know if I've revised or not, honestly, was that they looked at the story and they were like, well, it'll be super easy to capture everything that's bad about Jack because it's all right there.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be super difficult to capture everything that's nuanced and human about Jack because that's all in his head. Which is kind of an interesting thing to say, where it's like, if everything good about you is inside your head, then you're actually just a bad person. Um,
Sure.
But
But I mean, I guess I don't know if I agree that that's true though. I don't think I agree that it's all in Jack's head. I mean, I think a
I
lot
hear.
of it is for sure.
Yeah, I no, you're right. Like you could have, if you could have easily actually injected a lot more uh, uh, texture to it by just showing him actually be sweet to Danny and Danny actually be sweet to him at
Hmm.
the beginning of the movie. I mean, even something as simple as like as they're walking around the hotel at the beginning of the movie, just have Danny like, you know, holding his father's hand, or you know, do the kid thing of like running ahead and then running back to grab his dad's hand to try to pull him along, or just any of these minor visual cues
Yeah.
could have changed the complexion at the beginning of the movie to make it like, oh, they have like a good relationship. And and then you would, instead of just, you would actually see the deterioration of it, instead of it just being monotonously, you know, distanced and then turning into fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think the movie like consciously keeps the two of them at a distance from each
Mhm.
other. They really do not interact very much, actually, except in a couple specific scenes. And in those scenes, it's universally creepy, and or the ones where he's chasing him around trying to murder him with an axe. And so you're right. Like the scenes when they're walking around the hotel, when Dick is giving them a tour of the kitchen, Jack isn't there, right? Like this, it's just Wendy and Danny. Jack is off doing work stuff, presumably with Ullman, and so there really is this real sense of isolation and distance between these two characters, and it's really interesting because like you maybe assume that Kubrick looks at this and says, you know, this guy broke his kid's arm. It's a thing that obviously has not been resolved between the two of them. I think that the message of that comes through very clearly in the way that uh Wendy like shares that news, right? Like she's obviously deeply uncomfortable about it still. Like she's trying to rationalize what happened a little bit, but is deeply uncomfortable with what happened and hasn't dealt with it either. And so there's this sense of distance between these three people before they even get in there, and none so greater as between Jack and Danny. And that doesn't allow for there to be any room for positivity in that relationship.
Yeah. Um, no, you're right. I'm glad you brought up the scene where she's talking to the, I guess, is it a doctor?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
doctor. Yeah.
Uh, because that, to me, on this viewing, I was, I don't know, it's one of those classic like Kubrick mysteries where you're like, okay, we're clearly doing something with this scene beyond what I'm grasping, or like there's something that's being communicated subliminally, or or something, some other channel of communication is occurring here,
Hmm.
because of how weird it is, right?
Yeah.
Like if a scene is just kind of inexplicably weird, then you can usually say like, okay, well then there's a point to what's happening here beyond just the conveying of the dialogue. um and I'm not really sure what it is. Like I mean, what you just said I think is definitely true, that you're showing that Wendy, I mean, interestingly enough, you're seeing this side of Wendy that's also in the book character, which is that she has this story that she repeats to herself and now to the doctor, where, you know, and then Jack pulled on his arm like anybody, like any parent does,
Hmm.
a million times, and just exerted a little too much force, and and it's, and like the way she says it, like that's a fantastic performance, because
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
see the like the constant effort required to keep up this narrative in her mind. And then of course the doctor just staring at her, just dead-eyed
Yeah.
stare of like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
um I I guess, yeah, I'm not even sure where I want to go by bringing. I mean, you brought up the scene, and then I was like, oh yeah, I remember I wanted to talk about the scene, and now I'm like, I don't know. Do you have anything more for me on like, am I missing something? Is this just a Kubrick thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it's trying to show that she's kind of terrified. Like she's
Hmm.
absolutely terrified, and this is, I think, the one through line of Wendy that we get from the book is that she's we don't get to see in this movie any of the baggage around her mother and her relationship with her mother, and how that kind of creates this perfect storm of a situation where she can't leave her marriage because she'll feel like she's, you know, proving her mother correct, and so she feels she's stuck and trapped in this thing. But I think the one thing that is absolutely true is she is 100% terrified of her husband. And this the speech that she's giving is, you're absolutely right, clearly rehearsed. Clearly she doesn't actually believe half the shit she's saying, but she's terrified. And she's kind of stiff and uncomfortable in how she's delivering it, because she knows if she fucks this up, the doctor's going to say something. The doctor might call Jack, like, and it might open this whole thing, and who the fuck knows what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's nothing in this movie that says that he's hurt her before, and we know in the book that wasn't the case. But in this version of the character, in this version of the relationship, I could totally see that he's been abusive to her before.
Mm-hmm.
And like, she's just, it's a really perfect performance. And you know, I think there's a lot of strength in Wendy that we saw in the book that I really grew to love. I don't want to call this the movie character not strong. Like, I think she's kind of a pure surface reading shows her relegated to really just kind of running around screaming. Like, I think it is funny that the climax of the story is entirely focused on Danny and Jack, and Wendy's role in this thing really is to just like run around the hotel, turn a corner, see something supernatural and terrifying, scream, and then run away, and then do it again like 3 more times. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like what she just does for the rest of the movie. So that's a little disappointing, but I think the essence of Wendy, I think, is kind of captured in this character.
Well, I mean, to that, I'll actually say that's not too much of a deviation from the book. I mean, the only difference in the book is that Jack actually catches up to her once or twice and injures her. And this is one of those things where it's like, yeah, that works great in the book, but I actually think this is a really great sort of change, because it maintains this tension where you're like, is he going to get him? Is he going to get him? Is he going to get him? And he never actually does. Right. It's once again, like, I do feel like he had a list of horror film tropes that he just was like, all right, got to subvert this one, got to subvert this one. So, like, you know, a slasher movie, the guy's chasing the woman, so we're going to get the gratuitous scene where he hits her with the axe or injures her in some graphic way to give everybody their jollies. And that it never happens. He never hurts her. He never hurts Danny. In fact, he gets the shit bit out of him hilariously.
Yeah.
He does kill Halloran, which is, I mean, that's its own sort of almost like borderline comedic anticlimax, which
it's such a weird choice. It's such a it felt like a weird choice to me every time I watch this movie, and none so more when right after reading the book.
Yeah.
Because the book has all these moments of, you know, classic King foreshadowing where we're building up to the fact that he's about to fucking die, and then it happens, and then the subversion is that it doesn't actually happen. But here we just go through these scenes where we're just cutting to Halloran slowly. And I mean, this is why we're going to talk about the Shinning in a bit. This is why the Shinning makes fun of it so much, because it's such an absurd thing to do that you go through all this trouble of bringing this character here, and his time in The Shining is like 30 seconds. He walks into the Overlook, walks around the corner, and then just immediately gets axed in the chest and is dead and gone. And really his entire service to the story was he brought the snowcat that they rode out on.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Which is just way bleaker, obviously, and goes with the tone of the movie. But it's, I mean, you're right. Like, it's it isn't actually funny, because at no point am I actually laughing while watching The Shining, to be honest. But like, the idea that we spend so much time with him, like, talking to like rental car people, it's like it's such a tangent, right? It's like, okay, well, what's the payoff going to be? There's kind of like, the payoff is that he gets axed in the chest unceremoniously. And I mean, just now when I said that, I was like, and that's not a payoff. But now I realize, well, like, that kind of is the payoff, because it's a payoff via a subversion, where like you thought that this was going in a certain direction, but it's not. And like, and maybe you thought that, this is going to be a movie where he catches and murders his family, but it's not going to be that. And so it's keeping you in a place of uncertainty and off
Yeah.
balance by interrupting whatever you expected to happen and just not letting that happen.
Yeah.
And also it makes the situation seem a lot more dire because it's scary in the sense of being tense as he's chasing them around with the axe, obviously. But then when he finally actually murders someone, it's like, oh, like, okay, so we crossed the line into he is now a murderer.
Yeah.
He's not just, a potential murderer. And then that makes it even more monstrous and scary.
Yeah. We kind of veered off topic a little bit, but I guess what I wanted to say about I think you're right that this is like the movie version of like consigning Wendy to not really have much to do at the end is true to the book. I will say that the one change that they made is that, in the movie, he's let out of the pantry, and then like the next time Wendy sees him is when he's busting down the door to come get them.
Right.
In the book, there's this very powerful scene that I love very, very much, where she is like willing herself to leave the apartment and go check on him because she has to know and she has to face her problems and she has to deal with it. And I think that's such an important moment of growth for a character who kind of has been pushing off the idea of dealing with it for the entire book. Like she almost got a divorce, but then he said hold off a week, and then she was just like like he's getting better, and so none of the underlying problems have really been solved, but whatever, I don't have to deal with this right now, so I'm not going to deal with it. And so it is this really moment, and it's a powerful moment for her, that she walks out there and eventually faces him and stabs him in the back, and that is removed, so it resigns her to a little bit more passivity in the story, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. I agree. I mean, because the way it is now, she locks him up and then she's literally like sleeping.
Yeah.
Which is like, yeah, that's it. That is literally passivity. And then Danny's the one who wakes her up with the red rum, which is just a great moment. And then at the pinnacle of that, the axe slams into the door, and it's just so good.
It is so good. Although it's so funny. I think we talked about this at the beginning of the book episodes, but it is so funny to me that one of the things that stood the test of time in pop culture with this movie is red rum, and it's because the sequence is so good.
Yeah.
But like, it doesn't actually make any sense why Danny is saying red rum and writing red rum, and like in the book, the reason why he sees the word red rum is because Tony is talking to him through the mirror, and so the mirror is reflecting the writing of murder, and he's a kid, so he doesn't fully understand that, and he can't even read the words, and so he just sees this reflected word and just processes it as red rum. There's none of that in the movie. He just wakes up in Tony form, and then writes red rum and lipstick on the door, and that's it. And it's just like, I mean, again, the scene is wonderful. It's so effective. It's so weird. And part of the reason that it works so well is that it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But it cracks me up because this is a thing that had a very specific, important meaning in the story, and we just kind of ripped it out and threw it in here without any of the setup, and yet it works.
Yeah. Well, I honestly think that was part of a pattern where I think Kubrick was like, okay, so we're gonna basically pull these random threads out of this this story, and take little snippets of things and sprinkle them throughout, and the effect is going to be the implication that something vast and Lovecraftian and unknowable is going on here. Mm-hmm. So you've got the kid suddenly being possessed to write red rum on the thing. You've got you've got the ghost guy in the dog costume who shows up for 2 seconds, which makes no sense at all.
He's just doing sex stuff.
It's just doing.
That's it.
It's not even. I mean, what's funny is like you're right that he's doing sex stuff, but like maybe he like it's so vague that you're like,
Mhm.
I guess that's a sex thing.
Well,
But
he has his butt flap in his dog costume
yeah,
open.
but why is he in a dog costume though? It's right. It's surreal.
Yeah.
It's like a Dali painting. You're like,
Right.
what is happening here?
Yeah, and again, the King version has a perfect explanation for why he's in a dog costume. But
Right.
yeah, Kubrick rips that out, removes the
Yes.
context, and just allows the weirdness to sit there.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, even the last shot, which is not from the book, where we have Jack in the photograph, it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's the exact thing. That's the exact thing I was thinking when I watched it this time. I was like, this is one of the most iconic and wonderful moments in cinema, and it has zero meaning besides the huh. That's weird. It has no like. Does it mean like? I mean, I think the meaning conveyed is that he's become part of the hotel now, right? And
Yeah.
that's it. But like the actual like logic behind it, there is none. There's none. And it's so great. It's so great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in much the same, you know, the fact that when he goes into the Colorado Lounge and there's people there and he just has no reaction to it, that was always that was the thing where I going to the book, I was like, how are we going to handle this? Like, how does Jack just totally normalize the idea that there's just people here?
Yeah.
And because in the movie that always was so jarring to me that he just has absolutely no problem with the fact that the hotel is full of people randomly.
Yeah. One of the things I was actually surprised about that I had forgotten was that there are actually two bar scenes in the movie, just like there were two bar scenes in in the book. Now in the book, the first one, there's no one there and he's drinking fake drinks. In the movie, it literalizes that a little bit more. But I think there's enough room for you to say that was all in his head, like because he takes a drink in that scene, right? Was that the first moment he actually drank in the movie?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know, honestly.
Right. Well, yeah. So the way I've have chosen to view it personally is that we're getting a peek into his unraveling mind, basically, and the reading of the film Shining, where it's all in his head, doesn't work for the same reasons that the reading of the book that it's all in his head doesn't really work, which is that we have Wendy see things that are supernatural, and we have Danny behaving in ways that are sort of inexplicable if there's not something supernatural. But also at the same time, it's a metaphor for him losing his mind and him becoming increasingly okay with seeing things that are clearly not there and just normalizing that. That's totally, that's just what it is we're watching him just become overtaken by his delusions and his paranoia and whatever else.
No, I agree. So let's talk about the ending a little bit. So obviously this is one of the biggest changes in the book. There is no boiler, although technically there is a boiler in the movie. We do see one shot of Wendy checking the boiler with a clipboard in her hand, which I know I pointed this out on the Other Levels of the Tower episode. I'm going to do so again here. The most hilarious thing about this movie is that not once in the entire thing do we see Jack do any caretaking whatsoever, ever. Ever.
Yeah, right. In fact, we see him violently bouncing tennis balls off the wall.
A wall that's got picture frames hanging from it. It's like, I hope you don't miss, buddy. I think that is really hilarious that like we see one or two scenes of Wendy doing some caretaking, but Jack is doing Jack shit, which is hilarious and I think absolutely intentional on Kubrick's point.
Totally.
But yeah, anyway, the change there's no boiler, there's no exploding hotel. The hotel does not explode. The hotel specifically goes on. It is just Jack Torrance that is killed at the end, frozen in our hedge maze, which is another big change. There's no hedge animals. There is a hedge maze. That's one choice that I can totally get behind from a cinematic perspective. I don't think the hedge animals would work. I have specific evidence of this in the 97 movie, which has its charm certainly, but the hedge animals do not work at all in that film. And the hedge maze is this perfect idea for an incredibly creepy centerpiece of the movie that I think Kubrick rightly said, okay, if we're going to do a hedge maze, like we have to end there. That has to be the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. I mean, and also I guess I kind of like, I just kind of like the way Danny leads him into the hedge maze and then does the backtracking thing. Like it makes, for a movie where you could say that Danny and Wendy suffer from a lack of agency in a way that sort of harms your ability to connect with to their characters, Danny actually showing some cleverness there and tricking his father and getting out of there is a bright spot for me. I've always liked that part.
Do you find it bordering unbelievable that he is that clever?
I mean, yeah, actually, like that's Danny's a weird kid, I guess is what I would say to sort of defend that and be
sure.
He's always sort of detached, and so the idea that he would think of a clever solution, but
there's no setup for it in the movie, which is something like, by the way, I'm not saying that I dislike it. I think I'm with you that the first time you watch the movie, you see him kind of retrace his steps and then jump off to the side and you're like, oh, that's fucking smart. And I think this is true to Stephen King, by the way, that has a lot of child characters like do incredibly smart, clever things when they get out of bad situations. Thinking of Salem's Lot here, where the kid like uses his knowledge of ropes and stuff to loosen himself out of his bindings. But it is interesting that there's no setup in this movie for why that specific idea would occur to him. Like the screenwriter 101 in me wants to say, like, you really should have like thrown one little moment earlier in the movie that would set up why the kid would think of this thing here. But I don't think it actually needs it. So I'm couching this critique in, I don't think it's bad, but I think it's just worth talking about that. Like, part of me is always like, that's almost too clever.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like even as we're just talking about it, before you said that, I was like, I think I like that watching it as a kid because it's like a victory, but it's like, but is it really like an earned victory? Yeah, I mean, you're totally right that if it were like anybody but Kubrick, there would have been an earlier scene where the idea of backtracking through either snow or some other material would have been established as like a concept, so that it didn't feel like it came totally out of left field. It's interesting.
The scene works for me. It really does. But yeah, it's just interesting how Kubrick like oftentimes like eschews normal storytelling convention to create these moments, these wonderful moments that work, because I think Jack Torrance wandering freezing cold through the maze, like as a metaphor for his collapse into his own mind, I think is just absolutely perfect. It's just perfect. And I would never want to see any bit of this changed, but yeah, it's just really interesting to me that this thought occurs to me every time I watch it. And this is not something, Danny does get a moment in the book that is like, he gets to be the one that realizes that Jack forgot about the boiler. And so he does get to have his moment of cleverness, his moment of kind of taking control of the situation as well. It's just very, very different from the way the movie does it.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it would have felt super different. There's a bleakness throughout the whole movie, and like the final shot of Jack sitting there frozen to death is the capper on that. Whereas if Jack had run off to the boiler and then the boiler had blown up in this spectacular fireball of cinematic excess, then that would have been totally clashing with this tone of cold, bleak hopelessness. That just wouldn't have really fit.
No. So Matt, the question here, which is better? You have to answer. You have to.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, I definitely loved the novel, and I don't think I love the Shining film as much as you do, and I definitely don't hate it as much as our friend Michael does. But I liked it more this time. I will say that, like, because I came into it being like, oh yeah, it's pretty great, I guess. But then I was reminded in the back half of the movie what a masterpiece it is. I think it gets a ding for the first half being kind of incredibly slow, according to me. I think just this is interesting, but I listened to the music to the movie much louder than I usually do because of it doesn't matter why. It was much louder, and that allowed me to really like bathe in like the horribly uncomfortable music, which is just great. And like the heartbeats and the shrieking sounds and just the back, like even the faint background sounds, which are probably subliminal if you watch it at a normal volume. Really, really great. Like a huge part of the movie actually is the sound. I just wanted to say that because I forgot to say how much I enjoy the music this time around. I think I'm going to go with the book after dissembling for a while. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think the book is a better story. Like, it's so fascinating to me because this is one of the things that I love about adaptations is I think this movie takes a story and kind of throws the story part out and takes the central idea and then makes something that's an absolute masterpiece of tension, of just filmmaking. Just like the parts that you were bored of is like the parts where I'm just like sitting back and marveling at what Kubrick is doing with his camera, how he's constructing these scenes to be like so off-putting and weirdly uncomfortable. Like Jack and Ullman talking to each other over a desk for their interview, like that's just like a normal conversation that people have every day of just like talking to a prospective new employer about your employment. And then like Kubrick like insists upon doing weird cutting and angles with the camera where you're just like made uncomfortable. And like I don't know, I'm just fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by the detail of this movie. I'm fascinated by the little touches. I'd love Danny Torrance riding around on his big wheel. And just like I think we talked about this on the other levels of the tower episode, but like the sound, you talked about the score, but the sound of this movie, the sound of the big wheel like transitioning from the carpet to the hardwood, and those distinct noises and the mood they give off, it all is just so wonderful to me. I think the book is a better story. I think the book is better told, all in all. But like as a visual feast, like this movie is so good.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's very hard for, I think, us because we have narrative sensibilities that are sort of fine-tuned to appreciate what Stephen King does, where he is a narrative master. And it's almost like Kubrick sat back and said, how do I not do any of that stuff?
Yep.
So I guess as we're wrapping up, like you just mentioned the scene with Ullman, where that was a tense scene. We've got Jack, super hates Ullman. Ullman doesn't much care for him, but he's been railroaded into accepting this guy who he doesn't really think is going to be professional as the caretaker of his beloved hotel. There's a huge amount of built-in character conflict, and this is like the first scene of the book, and it's great. It's great character. It's great narrative. It's exactly how you build a scene, exactly how you open a book, textbook. What do we get in the movie? The most boring, straightforward conversation of all time between two men who are just kind of being calm and mildly interested in what the other person is saying, except it's shot super weird for some reason.
Yeah. Isn't it brilliant? Isn't it brilliant?
It's very, I guess it's brilliant. Like that's... I'm still not sure. I mean, if Michael were here, he would say, no, it's not. It's just Kubrick doing self-indulgent weird things that you don't understand, and then waggling his eyebrows suggestively if people are like, what did it mean? And I don't know. I'm not that cynical about Kubrick. I think he usually does have something in mind for what he's doing, but I don't know that I got it in this movie. So
that's totally fair. I get it. I think you're right that like our specific kind of the thing we look for in our entertainment is the narrative, is the storytelling. And this is one of those movies where I will be the first to say, the story is not that compelling. The characters are in and of themselves not that compelling. It is the filmmaking that I just absolutely adore about this thing, and the performances. My God, Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, just absolutely incredible in this movie. Just staggering talent there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely an amazing movie. That's for sure. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, ultimately, the book is I think a superior story. And is saying more, is doing more, is exploring ideas in a way that the movie really is interested in exploring ideas, because it's more interested in exploring tone and emotion and feeling.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah. Or yeah. Or just like hitting you on layers that are only going to become clear to you several years after you watch it, right?
After you watch the excellent and incredibly true documentary Room 237, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. You watched that documentary, right?
I watched that documentary. I mean, it reminds me. I just watched the other day. I watched a YouTube video about Eyes Wide Shut, which is a movie that I had seen.
Mm-hmm.
And
love that movie too. Absolutely love that movie.
I think it's a great movie, but I definitely walked away from it being like, I think I maybe understood 20% of like what I was supposed to get from that. I mean, you always want to be clear. Like, I understood the plot.
Uh-huh.
It's just clear that there's much more that he's trying to say, right?
Sure.
And this YouTube video really nailed some things down for me in a way where I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I'll buy that was a big part of what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
And pointing out things with color and stuff where you're like, yeah, totally, he absolutely is doing that on purpose.
Yeah, there's a sane version of that, which is probably, I haven't seen this YouTube video you're referencing, but probably that. And then there's an insane version of this thing, which is basically everyone in that documentary Room 237, which is like, I agree. Kubrick was really into the details. Totally. The lengths that those people go to make assumptions and meanings out of this movie are just insane.
Yeah.
Like the whole, my favorite argument is the one about how the architecture of the hotel makes no sense, right? Because people are turning ways and directions that they shouldn't. And I'm like, y'all, it's a set. It's none of this is real. Like, they constructed sets and they had characters go from one place to another when it made logical sense for the scene. I doubt even the master of detail Kubrick had like the geography of everything mapped out in his head. I just don't think so. That's not how movies are made.
I agree with you. My favorite is them saying that they changed it to Room 237 because like the room is 200, the moon is 237 thousand kilometers away. Miles away, and this is an indication that he's admitting this is his confession that he faked the moon landing. when number one, the moon is not like, it's not 237.
Yeah, that's just wrong.
It's slightly off, but it's off. And then also like it's just a fact that they actually had a room 217 in that hotel, and they were like, could you just not do that?
Yeah. They just specifically asked them not to use that room because they didn't want to hurt their hotel bookings. So they picked a room that the hotel that they filmed in did not actually exist. Boom, problem solved.
Yep, exactly.
I enjoyed that the all the wide shots of the hotel did not include the hedge maze, and Kubrick is like, I don't care. Like, there's the first opening wide shot we get of the hotel is like there's clearly no hedges around it, and then when we see it later, it's like right next to the hotel. So like you can't even like do a oh no it's further out thing, and it's just like, yeah, we don't give a shit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I never even noticed that. I think what I do in a situation like that is I'm just like, I assume it's like on the other side or something. Whatever.
Well, it's a full circle around the whole property thing. Can I just say, and I know we said this before, I want to say it again here at the end. I want to give the most amount of credit to Mike Flanagan for taking this iconic movie and the iconic performances in this movie and saying, yeah, we're going to do this again. In the Dr. Sleep movie, like the idea that like he hires someone to replace Jack Nicholson's performance is so insane. Like, just like to hear it would be like, you've got to be fucking insane to do this, and he just does it, and it works, man. It works. I don't know. Like, just watching this movie, every time I watch this movie again, it just reminds me of just Mike Flanagan's enormous balls to take on this story in the way he did, and it's like it becomes even more impressive when seeing how freaking good this movie was.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
All right. Anything else about The Shining?
Not about The Shining.
All right. Well, let's move on to The Shinning. Let's talk about The Simpsons, Matt. Did you know? I looked through our archives before this episode. We have never, one time in our whole podcasting career, talked with each other about The Simpsons outside of like random references and discussion questions that both made us laugh because we both really enjoy The Simpsons.
I mean, I think I did know that because a long time ago, it occurred to me that maybe we could do that, but then it was like way too intimidating of a thing to actually tackle. It's like,
yeah,
that would have to be like a show or something, or because how do you talk about The Simpsons, right? We're going to talk about like a 10-minute part of one episode,
uh-huh.
and it's going to be hard to do it justice. I mean, suffice it to say, we both grew up with The Simpsons during what I would say is its golden age, when we were sort of at our most receptive to its. I don't recall exactly what years you watched it versus what years I watched it, but I watched it all through middle school and high school, and I just always loved it. And
yeah. My parents did not like it, or rather, I should say, my mom did not like it and did not want us to watch it. And my dad thought it was hilarious, and so when my mom was not home, he would put it on. Sorry if I'm narking on you 20 years later, Dad. But so I mean, like, I definitely watched it often, but at first it was like my mom would change the channel if she saw me watching it, and then she eventually just gave up, but would give those like noises of annoyance or disgust, like, oh, every time there was a joke that she found a little bit off color in it. So you couldn't pay me to remember exactly which parts I didn't watch and at what years. I would say I'm very confident that I watched it pretty religiously during the heyday of The Simpsons, in which this episode we're about to talk about, I think is firmly in the middle of.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, huge Simpsons fan.
Me too. And we will have to have a broader conversation about it at some point in the future. I think you're absolutely right that like trying to put our heads around what like an episode talking about The Simpsons would even be was so daunting. We just kind of said, nope, can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
But this episode in particular, about The Shining, comes in the Treehouse of Horror number 5, I believe. Which, for those that don't know, The Simpsons is every Halloween they do a Treehouse of Horror special, which is 3 short stories that take place over the course of the episode, usually Halloween or spookiness themed. It is season 6, episode 6. I believe it aired in 1993. Is that right? I think that's right.
I'm looking this up as we speak because it's 1994 was the original air date, actually.
Okay, 1994. All right. So we were 9 years old, which I think is like the perfect range. And this is an interesting thing about The Simpsons for me, Matt, is I am almost confident that I saw this before I saw The Shining. Just like I know for a fact that I saw the Simpsons episode spoofing Cape Fear before I saw Cape Fear, the Sideshow Bob episode. Like that is for people that grew up with The Simpsons like this, it is a really interesting window into pop culture and film, because they parody films, or they did. I don't know if they do it anymore, but they parodied films so often and so well that you would like you would see these things and then learn that it was a reference to something later. Like I watched the entire Sideshow Bob episode with no knowledge that Cape Fear was a thing that existed. And then years later watched the Cape Fear movie and I was like, hey, wait a minute. That's the whole Simpsons episode.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that the thing that sets The Simpsons apart from a lot of things that do parody is that the thing that the Simpsons parodies stand on their own. And like you just said, you don't even necessarily know that it's that it's a parody, except for the fact that maybe it'll just have elements in it where you're like, okay, that's just too weird and specific. Like the episode 22 short films in Springfield or whatever it's called, which is the Pulp Fiction episode. It's like, okay, it's too enormously weird and different relative to normal Simpsons for you to not notice. But at the same time, you can just watch that episode and kind of forget about Pulp Fiction, because really it is all of these classic Simpsons moments and bits that are just quintessentially Simpsons, and not really leaning on Pulp Fiction in any way.
And I think that's the same thing about The Shinning, because there are obviously a lot of great Shining joke references throughout this thing, but they are rooted in Simpson bits. Like the reason why so much of this is funny is because it's Homer saying it, not because it's just doing a Jack Nicholson impression. Like, I mean, this, first of all, this thing is like 9 minutes long, maybe less. And it's like all bangers. Like every minute of this 9 minutes is like chock full of hilarious jokes and references to this movie. And it is wild to me, because I didn't like, I knew in the rational side of my brain that Treehouse of Horror was 3 stories over the course of 30 minutes. And so therefore each one has to be incredibly short. But like, watching it over again, I just forgot like how quick it is. And I think this is part of the greatness of it, is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. It comes in, it just throws down like a incredibly fast forwarded version of this movie that just hits joke after joke after joke after joke, and then it's like, we did it, we're done, we're out, and we're gone. And I think this is actually, I bring this up because just this past year, Matt, The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror made a big deal over the fact that for this year, the whole Treehouse of Horror episode is going to be a spoof of Stephen King's It. And it was awful. It was really bad. And it's not fair to compare these two things, because like it's a completely different writer staff. The people that make the show today versus the people that made the show back in 1994 are just entirely different. But it is really interesting to see, like, it is just a clear, why was this successful and this not successful? Well, it was better written, but also it did its thing, and then it moved on.
I haven't seen the episode you're talking about, but like the thing about all of the most bad spoofs, like what they do is they just do the thing from the original thing, and then they kind of go you recognize that it's the thing from the thing that we're doing. And like that's the joke, and you're supposed to be like it's the I recognize that joke, which is not actually funny. Whereas like in The Shinning, you've got like groundskeeper Willie tending to the hedge maze carefully with a watering can, which is hilarious. He's using a watering can on a giant hedge maze. Like that's already a visual gag, because it makes no sense. And then Bart chainsaws his way through the entire hedge maze, which is a hilarious thing, and exactly the kind of thing that Bart would do. Like character driven humor, and that's I just described like 4 seconds of this thing, right? So it's like the density. That was always the thing about The Simpsons for me that really made it, was the density of like bam bam bam, like the pace. There's really nothing else quite like it, actually.
And I think to your point, like the Simpsons, and this episode in particular, uses the parody as a backdrop to tell different jokes. Like the one I really love is their spoof on the very like loud boom with the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday thing, right? So this is the thing that The Shining does, and how does the Simpsons parody off of that joke? Well, it does this thing where they're driving the long journey to the hotel, and then Homer realizes he's left the front door unlocked, and so every time we nail this joke, we cut to the next day with the funny like boom Wednesday, boom Thursday, and it's just like it's a parody. It's parodying The Shining, yes, but it's also just a funny ass joke in and of itself. And then of course they nail the 3-beat with, oh no, we forgot Grandpa, and Homer doesn't say a word. He just keeps driving, and it's perfect. It's perfect.
What about Grandpa? It's absolutely great. So many minuscule touches too. I one thing I noticed this time, I don't know if I've ever noticed before, is after Homer has gone insane, so he has there's the 2 hairs on top of his head, and now they're like flopped down slightly. Right. And it's like, it's literally just a nod to the idea that Jack Nicholson's hair is the particular way that it is in that movie.
Yep.
That's Homer with disheveled hair is his normally, comma shaped hair is slightly flooped down.
Yeah, and then he's doing like this his give me the bet, give me the bet. Like it's aping Nicholson's kind of unhinged performance on the stairs, right? Like he is a parody of that, but it is a Homer centric parody of that, where it's not just Homer doing Nicholson. It's kind of like what if Jack Nicholson was Homer Simpson type of thing. I don't know. It just really it really worked on me. It really worked. It's just really, really funny, actually.
Yeah. The kind of interesting thing to me about it is like you know and love Homer Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that it's not like some alternate dimension. It is Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
And Mr. Burns is having him and his family go to this is always the fun thing to me about the Treehouse of Horror episodes, I guess, is that you're taking the characters that you know from this mundane world of The Simpsons, which is every other episode, and then you're basically honoring their character, except now they're in some weird surreal situation or something horrible is happening. And I've always loved that idea. My kids loved the Treehouse of Horror episodes. When I was a kid, you couldn't just put any old episode on; you just watch the reruns.
Sure.
But now my kids, they will preferentially watch the Treehouse of Horror episodes on Disney Plus because they're the most, I think my kids like scary things, actually.
Yeah.
Just in general.
No, but you're right. The success of those Treehouse of Horror episodes, especially the ones that are spoofing movies, this is not Homer Simpson as Jack Torrance. This is just, what if you put the Simpsons in the situation of The Shining? What would happen? And the perfect picture of that is what causes Homer to go crazy? Is it the isolation? No, it's that he doesn't have TV and he doesn't have beer. Like, it's not even that, he's an alcoholic. It's just that he doesn't have TV and he can't drink beer. And the joke of it is that it happens instantly. It happens right away. It's so fast.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. You could believe that Homer is always 2 seconds away from going insane and murdering everyone without TV and beer.
Well, and the interesting thing that it does is that, like, Homer doesn't even really want to kill them, right? Like, I love the like, Mo, can you get me a beer? No, not unless you kill your family. And like, then when he's locked into the pantry, they have to drag him out because again, the true to Homer Simpson-ness of this is he doesn't really want to ever do anything. So like, doing something is pushing him to an action that he doesn't really want to do. And so even this, he kind of has to be pushed and prodded into it, which is such a fun reflection of the hotel corrupting Jack Torrance idea. It's just good. It's just really good.
Yeah, it's smart, right? It's smart. Mm-hmm. That's, I mean, once again, like the perfect example when like in the movie, I noticed this time because I had just watched The Shinning. When Grady goes to wake up Jack in the pantry, Jack is laying next to this pile of like rumpled up chip bags and open boxes. So he's been in there a while. He's gotten into the food. And there's a little pile of trash next to him. Totally like normal, reasonable thing for there to be in the film. But then in The Simpsons, Homer is surrounded by just piles of trash and food waste because of course you lock Homer in the pantry, he's going to start eating everything in the pantry. And it's the kind of thing where that's like the visual gag that's happening while the story is happening, and you could not even make the connection to The Shining because I literally just watched these back to back basically. So the image was in my head, but it's the kind of thing where it's not shoving the connection in your face and going, see, remember the thing? It's just a clever little nod, and then we move on and we don't dwell on it and mug for the camera. God, I just love the way they do things.
Yeah. Speaking of clever and smart, one of my favorite jokes of this thing is one that is so, I think, clever that you might not even get it right away, which is that it's a joke actually, which is when like Homer runs off. I think he says, maybe I'll go check out the axe collection, and they just watch him leave. And then Lisa goes, Mom, is Dad gonna kill us? And her response is, we're just gonna have to wait and see. And I think like that's really funny on its own. But I also think it's kind of a clever dig at the movie, in the passivity that the Wendy character has in that movie specifically. Just the idea that like this guy is clearly an unhinged maniac, and we're not going to do anything about it at all until it's too late. I think it's very like, you can tell they probably had a whole conversation around this in the waiting room, and they just buried it in this really funny joke. And I don't know, it just speaks to the cleverness of the writing.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I agree with your take where that's also the kind of thing where it's funny on its own, even if you hadn't seen The Shining. Yeah. And then it's funnier if you think like, oh, that's making fun of Wendy specifically.
Yeah. And so many iconic quotes, so many like I can't tell you how many times I've used the urge to kill rising.
Oh yeah.
Totally. Fading, rising.
And God, yes, everything about it. You're right. It's perfect. It's like
8.5 minutes long, and it's just perfect. It really is.
Yeah.
We already talked about Willie getting just totally axed in the back and how funny that is. It's all great. It's all great. Yeah. But just like in the movie, Willie leaves something in the snow that helps our characters solve their problem. Yeah. He shows up just like Dick does, and he leaves something key to their survival in the snow before he dies.
Yep, exactly. and no stitch dropped at all. I'm trying to so Treehouse of Horror 5 is this is not specific to this, but it is like it is actually probably the best.
I think it is.
A Halloween episode too, because the next one after The Shinning is the Butterfly Effect,
the toaster one,
time machine one, and then the last bit is the Nightmare Cafeteria, where the teachers decide to start eating the students, and these are all pretty. At least that last one is extremely dark. And I don't remember any other Halloween episode where they go that dark, actually, which I like. I think this may be one of my favorite episodes of The Simpsons, to be honest. So
no, it's really good. I mean, I wish I hadn't killed that fish is another thing that just was in my head on repeat that I said randomly all the time for the toaster one. Yeah. And then the cafeteria one is so good. And doesn't that one end with like, it's all a dream? And then they're like, you've got nothing to worry about except for the fog that turns people inside out.
Yeah. It's seeping in. And then they're just all inside out for the last.
And don't they do like a chorus line thing?
Yeah, they do a chorus line with their like blood getting everywhere, and then Santa's little helper attacks, I think, Bart, and is like mauling him, and there's blood everywhere. And
I need to finish. I just pulled up the Shinning one on Disney Plus, and then I stopped it after it was over. I should have just watched the whole episode.
Oh God, it's amazing.
It's so good. Episode. So Bob Cushel, the writer, wrote the Shinning portion of this, because I think one of the things with Treehouse of Horror too is that everyone in the writers' room got to kind of write their own of the short stories.
That's cool. That's cool to know, because I think all three of them do kind of feel different.
Yeah.
They're like different little bits of like what was great about The Simpsons, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. There's different writers taking different cuts at it. That's great.
I'm still really sad that like the It one from this past year, like maybe I'll send you to watch that after we finish reading it, because I was just really incredibly disappointed with how that turned out. There were a couple moments that I kind of chuckled, but most of it was just not very good.
That's my experience with modern Simpsons is generally just being like, every 5 minutes you get one of those. It's just not nearly. It doesn't have the density, and then there's a lot of stuff where it's like supposed to be funny, and I'm just like, it's not funny. It's nothing.
I mean, it's just like how long has this fucking show been going on for? You know, you just like, I understand that you have new writers come in, but eventually, like,
Yeah.
you've just like I think there was that video essay we watched years ago about kind of the decline of the Simpsons, and the essayist trying to like pinpoint exactly what it is, and it's really just kind of the characters moving from character to caricature.
Yeah.
And like that happens in all shows, right, like any sitcom that's run for a certain amount of time, as it goes on the characters behave less and less like people and more like insane amalgamations of we need you to behave this way because we have to tell a joke if you look at Friends as a sitcom, a very successful sitcom, they started off as people, and by the end of it, like Joey it was funny because he's kind of the dumb one of the group, and by the end of it, he's just like a raving idiot that
Yeah.
he's like he would never be able to exist in the world. He's so stupid, and it's because like you lean into an archetype, and then you have to continually go back to that well for more and more jokes, and it just compounds over and over and over and over until they're not people anymore. And
Yeah.
I think, I mean, these were cartoons, never quite people, but I think the same thing kind of happens here.
Yeah. I think there's a second failure mode, which is also operative, which it reminds me of one of my favorite like web comics, Achewood, that I used to just love. I mean, I still love, but the thing that happened was the author really wanted to avoid that. He wanted to avoid repeating himself, and he wanted to avoid falling into cliche. And so it ended up being an almost a totally separate way of breaking down, which is that it just drifted off into like total madness, in an effort to not just like sit with the same characters doing the same sorts of things over and over.
Yeah.
And he eventually stopped it, and it was like, yeah, I think it probably stopped being good well before he stopped it, and I think it was because he was just like, I said all I wanted to say with these characters, and if I try to not repeat myself, then I am doing weird things that nobody likes.
Yeah.
And that's I think kind of like The Simpsons suffers from a weird combination of bending over backwards to not repeat themselves, and yet also having to use the same characters, which like I'm thinking of, there's this episode I saw my kids showed me because they were like, this is a great episode of New Simpsons, and it's called A Serious Flanders. Have you heard of this?
I have not.
It's basically a Coen Brothers movie Simpsons episode. And then you ask which Coen Brothers movie.
I would assume A Serious Man, right?
And then I say yes, all of them. It's just a sort of pastiche. It's sort of just the kind of episode that the Coen Brothers would make if they were going to make a Coen Brothers movie. It's not actually any particular, but the point is, it's like actually extremely serious, and there's like some jokes in it. It's just weird how they literally were just like, let's just make a Coen Brothers movie episode that's barely funny at all.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing I mean when I say like they're doing really weird stuff. Anyway, that was a tangent talking about modern Simpsons.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think that is ultimately like why this was so successful is because, you know, Simpsons is still relatively new, and they obviously had this really fun idea, and you can kind of like, this is one of those things where you can kind of imagine the excitement in the writers' room as they say like, we're gonna parody Kubrick's The Shining. Let's like just start tossing out ideas, and because they only had 9 minutes to work with, they could pick the best of the best of the best of their ideas.
Yeah.
Like for example, when Burns is like, what is Burns? Why can't I remember Burns' assistant's name?
Smithers. Yeah.
Smithers. Thank you. Flanders was popping into my head when Smithers is like, maybe this is why they always go insane and kill their families, is because you take away the TV and beer. And he's like, interesting point. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, if we come back and they're all slaughtered, I'll buy you a Coke. And it's just like every joke is the best version of that particular joke.
I agree.
That's why it's successful. And this is why I always say that it's good for things to end. Things shouldn't last forever. Stories like this should like go on and on and on and on and on and on forever. Endings are good. So don't be sad this Succession and Barry are coming to an end this year, everyone, because it's good for things to end.
I didn't even know those were still going. So, yeah.
It's only been 4 seasons. It's not like they've gone on for a super amount of time.
Well, I don't watch them. So,
speaking of ending, I think we're ready for this episode to end, Matt.
Sounds good.
And that means it's an end of our time with The Shining. It's been, I think this is episode 11. So it's been almost 2.5 months with The Shining. little more than that, I guess. It was a great time. Loved The Shining. So happy you got to journey through this book with me. But it's time to move on.
All right, sounds good.
So we were moving on to, we're going to stay in the 70s, but we are moving on to King's first short story collection titled Night Shift. We talked about this a couple episodes ago, but wanted to remind everyone, Night Shift is weird as far as audiobook stuff goes, and there is no one audiobook that has all Night Shift stories in it. Fortunately, if you wanted to listen via audiobook, we do have someone, Reddit user Tower Math, who very, very nicely put together a spreadsheet that lists all the stories in Night Shift and where you can see them in audiobook format. There are also, I think, one or two stories that don't appear in any kind of audiobook at all, but Tower Math was nice enough to point us to YouTube videos that show people reading those stories as well. So if you wanted to audiobook solely it, that's the way to do it. Matt, I think you're going to be just reading it like a normie.
I'll try. I'll do my best.
Okay. So that is what's going to begin next week. Next week, we are going to be reading the first 5 stories of Night Shift. We're going to be reading Graveyard Shift, Night Surf, I Am the Doorway, The Mangler, and The Boogeyman. We will not be reading the story Jerusalem's Lot, which is technically the first story of the book, because we already read that one. After we finished Salem's Lot, we read that short story, as well as One for the Road, which also takes place in Night Shift. So we're not going to reread and retalk about those stories. If you want to listen to those, you can go back to that episode. But so it'll be these 5 right here. Once again, those are Graveyard Shift, Night Surf, I Am the Doorway, The Mangler, and The Boogeyman. So 5 stories we got to tackle next week, Matt. I hope you're ready.
I am.
I am too. I'm very excited about this. This is going to be new for us. And we talked about the Doofcast last week that we're trying to come up with a new series for that. And one of the things you proposed was a series on short stories. And so this is going to kind of be a trial run for us to see how a short story episode goes. So we'll kind of see how this goes these next few weeks. And we'll see if we want to do that over on that show.
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. So that's it for us here this week. Next week, as we said, Night Shift begins with those 5 stories. Get the book and get reading, folks.
Yeah, remember you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at r/doofmedia is a great place to see what's going on in the community and find out those secret links to the audiobook stuff.
Yeah, tons of posts over there recently. Really active. That makes me really happy to see. Hope you guys are enjoying chatting with each other. A really fun thread someone put out there about what other books are you reading, and there's a lot of cool things. A lot of big Stephen King fan sharing other books that they're reading is always really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely.
And we want you to subscribe as well, because why haven't you done that yet? Huh?
I'm sure they have, Scott. Scott, calm down.
Huh?
Calm down.
I'm calm.
Okay. It's you've subscribed, right? Okay, good. All right. And if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to patreon.com/doofmedia. We would appreciate it.
But if you cannot afford to right now, that is absolutely okay. We totally understand. There are tons of ways to help us out, though. You can share the podcast, especially as we move into Night Shift. Once again, this is new territory for us, and we would love for some new listeners to come along for the ride. So share this, tell people we're looking at short stories. Short stories are short, and therefore you have time to read them, and so you can do so with us. So share, and share alike. What does that phrase mean?
I don't. It just seems repetitive to me. It's like, of course, you share.
But what does sharing alike mean?
Like I share you and you share back, and like we're both sharing.
It's sharing back. I see.
I don't know that, though. That just is the only thing that makes sense to me.
Am I the only one? Whenever I think about sharing, I think about the song from All Dogs Go to Heaven when they're sharing the pizza with all the little puppies.
I'm gonna be honest. Despite the fact that was a traumatic part of my childhood, as it was with all 80s kids, I don't remember that particular song. I'm sorry.
The more you share, the more you're gonna get.
Okay.
That's all I remember.
It does sound familiar now. So,
but I remember it distinctly because, first of all, there's drip in the pizza all over the place. They're like wasting the pizza, and also there's like it's kind of like Charlie's Jesus, because I really feel like there's more slices of pizza than there was in the pizza box. So he's like dividing the fish and the bread.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that was an intentional point. I don't know.
I do vaguely remember being irritated by all of the things that you're describing here.
Is Charlie supposed to be Jesus in that movie?
Doesn't he come back to life?
Yes.
So I'm going to go with the yes on that. C is Charlie. What's his name? Is he a JC?
I think he's just Charlie.
Okay. I mean, C, Charlie Christ,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
It's CH, which means he's a Christ figure. No, we got it.
It's got
that's another fun idea for a series. Traumatic 80s cartoons that we watched and fucked us up.
yeah.
Because this was definitely one of them. This movie fucked me up.
Yeah, that's that would be, I think there's a lot of people around our age who probably need to have that in their life.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and end the show, though. Sorry for that that diversion. That is going to do it for us this week, folks. We will see you next week as we begin not All Dogs Go to Heaven, but Night Shift. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.